Good morning, I'm Raquel the Bell on the one and only WWNN 1470. Today in the studio we have Tracy from We Are the People. You can join her every Monday night from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on her website, wearethepeople.tv. Tracy tackles the student loan dilemma and offers viable options. And now, here's Tracy.
And good evening. It's Monday night about 7 o'clock, and we're filming live at the WNN 1470 AM radio station. We're also live on our website, wearethepeople.tv. And my guest tonight is Jeffrey Van Treese from Legal Talk here on WNN. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tonight we're going to talk about Citizens United. If anybody knows me from Facebook, I'm always talking about it on my personal page, not so much on the We Are the People page, and that's simply because I can't get my phone to work that way. I'm still having computer issues. But Citizens United is just a thorn in my side. I'm totally against the big money in politics, so that's why we wanted to discuss that tonight. Most people don't realize that Citizens United is two things. It is a PAC, which is a political action committee, and it is also a court ruling that actually started with Hillary Clinton. And how this affects student loans is the big money in politics is everywhere, but with student loans specifically, say for instance, Boehner, Fox, and Klein are all paid by the for-profit educational industry. How are we ever going to get a piece of legislation out there that is for the students? So with that, where do you want to start with this? There's so much to cover.
There's a lot to cover. I think maybe just going back and explaining the history of Citizens United and how it evolved. You know, this started back in 2004 when John Kerry was running for president. And the person that was in charge of Citizens United wanted to make a complaint to the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, claiming that Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11 movie should be considered a campaign contribution, or rather a campaign ad for the John Kerry campaign against George W. Bush in 2004. He wasn't successful with that complaint, but it gave him an idea, and that idea was that ultimately corporations or donors that would want to give to politicians should be able to be considered. Oh, gotta move this microphone closer to me. Should be considered people for purposes of the Constitution, and then that they can give unlimited money. So,
which is where it all started.
Which is where it all started. So what this eventually evolved into was some issues that came before the court with respect to considering what are corporations for purpose of the Constitution. Are corporations people? And when they give money, are they speaking? And what the Supreme Court ruled, an opinion written by John Roberts, that corporations are people for purposes of the Constitution. They have First Amendment rights to speech, and when they're giving money, they are essentially speaking.
That's crazy. And this also had to do with Hillary Clinton. I remember reading. There was 186 pages or something.
Well, Citizens United was a company that made documentaries that were so-called documentaries that were basically just scathing sort of propaganda campaign that was against Hillary Clinton.
The kind of stuff we always hate to see.
Exactly. So, what this evolved into is a situation where we've equated money with speech. So if you're Joe Sixpack on the street, the Constitution now says that, you can give money/speech to whoever you want, and Walmart can give money/speech to whoever they want. And it's your money/speech versus their money/speech.
And they have bigger money/speech, basically.
And really, that's how you have to describe it. It's money/speech, or speech/money.
Money talks, right?
Money talks. So, and this you have to just consider the common sense element of this question. When you're giving money, are you speaking? I mean, when I go to the grocery store and I buy...
It's a bribe.
Right. I go to the grocery store and I'm buying food. Am I speaking to anybody? I don't think so.
That's crazy. So the thing is, what I find very interesting is what people don't seem to realize is this. The Republicans always are griping about the unions being able to give money to politicians. Okay, the Democrats are always complaining about the corporations being able to give money to politicians. But it was this very same ruling that allowed that to happen with both. However,
The thing is that large corporations are always going to be able to outspend unions. And it is true, unions can give unlimited money as speech because they're organizations as well. Nonprofits are organizations. In fact, nonprofits are called corporations, depending on how it's viewed in the code.
Right.
So this is something that applies to both for-profit and nonprofit organizations, as well as nonprofit organizations that are set up for the benefit of for-profit organizations, which is where all of this can get quite confusing as well.
yeah, because you have the 501c4s and C6s, which are the harbingers of the dark money, so to speak, is what we hear.
Exactly.
And
So,
how do they differ from the super PACs?
well, super PACs are political action committees that truly you can have unlimited spending for a political candidate, but it doesn't go directly to that candidate. And the super PAC is not allowed to coordinate directly with the candidate, but they're allowed to go out and make ads and spend unlimited money to saturate the public with ads, positive, negative, or otherwise, for particular candidates, but they cannot coordinate directly with the candidate. This is considered kind of a sham to the extent that it's like a pretend wall between the super PAC and the
Yes.
candidate, but it's kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod. Everyone knows what's going
really
on
going
here.
on, yeah.
Exactly. And so ultimately, I think it's fascinating when you consider the Donald Trump phenomenon that we're seeing now, because it really turns the whole system on its head now that we have a billionaire running with
That
his
it
own
does.
money.
He has his own.
And this is something, I had a really good time watching.
He's very entertaining.
It is extremely entertaining. I had a really good time watching Trump since he made his announcement because it really was unprecedented. We didn't know where this was going to go because we never had somebody with that personality that had that much of his own money that he was willing to spend. And so everyone was saying, well, we should compare him to Michelle Bachmann, or we should compare him to Herman Cain, or whoever. It's like, well, they had this flash in the pan, many months out. In this case, well over a year out. We're like 450 days or whatever it is from the election, when they had their moment in the sun, and then they fizzled out. And they said, well, the same thing's going to happen to Trump.
Well,
And
I
I
don't know
never-
about that.
And you
He
say,
knows media.
he knows media, but the other thing is he's spending his own money, which is the single thing that differentiates him from anyone that's
everybody
come
else.
before him. And so, the thing is when somebody has that flash in the pan, something will happen, there'll be a scandal, there'll be some bad press, and then the donors pull their money out, and then the person fizzles and goes down and gets replaced by somebody else. We saw that with Herman Cain the last time around.
Right.
999 was all over the news. Then there
then
was
boop.
then there was a sex scandal, and the donors pulled their money out, and that was it. With Trump, nobody's going to pull any money out from Trump.
Well, he's a character because even now his house here in West Palm, I mean, he paid ridiculous amounts of money because he wanted to fly the American flag. You remember that many years ago? He was being fined daily thousands of dollars, and because his neighborhood, I don't know if his flag was too big. I don't really remember the story anymore, but like I said, I can't see myself supporting him, but he's definitely one to watch.
Well, I think it's refreshing whether or not you agree with what he
Right.
has to say, and I frankly disagree with much of what he has to say, but just the fact that they do genuinely appear to be his opinions. What he's saying are his opinions. He's not just parroting what he's being told to by the interests that he's representing, because that's usually how politics works. You have donors, they give money to candidates, and then they owe favors to their donors, and then it's just a matter of trying to distract the public with as
And
much
he's
rhetoric
brought that
as
to
possible.
the public attention,
and
too.
and he's brought that to the...
I mean, I enjoyed the first debate because he's like, I've given to them all, and when I tell them I want something, they give it to me. And their faces, it was priceless. They could do a Visa commercial for that one.
I thought it was great. Just the more that he's exposing this, the better. I mean, Bush
Yeah,
has gotten
absolutely.
over $100 million from political campaign contributions. Hillary Clinton's got over $60 million.
Goldman Sachs, Citicorp, AT&T. I mean, these are big speech companies, people. I mean, how can that possibly rewrite?
I mean, in 2012, it broke all records. We had over $1 billion per candidate.
Yeah,
And-
unbelievable.
And it's just great to see some of the stuff exposed. I think it's very interesting. The Koch brothers, which are considered to be the biggest players in the political process that are not themselves candidates or members of government. The Koch brothers have excluded Trump from this highly sophisticated.
I'm sure he's brokenhearted.
It's actually it's interesting. I don't think this is going to hurt him at all, but they've excluded him from a program called I-360, which is a sophisticated voter data bank that contains information about from consumer data, from credit bureaus, and social networks, among other things. It gives information like estimated income, recent addresses, how much different registered voters, how often they voted, how often they haven't voted, and even what type of cars they drive.
Well, that kind of information is going to come out against Trump anyway, because they're going to use
I'm saying
everything.
it's against the voters.
Yeah.
About the voters. So this is something that the candidates can use to shape their own campaign.
Okay, that's very interesting.
And this is something, it's amazing that all of this sophisticated, it's not really polling data, it's really voter data that's in this database belongs to the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers have
they own
access.
Everything.
They own this, and they've made it available to the other Republican candidates, but they have shut out Trump from getting this data. So I think it's really interesting. I can only imagine that they don't like that the game's being exposed.
Well, that data can be found elsewhere, though.
Possibly, but just the fact that they're taking this measure, that this amount of power is this concentrated, that the Koch brothers can exclude a candidate from receiving this information, I think it's quite troubling. I think Trump could really benefit from this by highlighting it.
I think he should, yeah.
I think he should. I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't.
Well, give him time, he will. Listen, there's a couple of websites that were up on the screen. I don't know where they went. But anyway, one of them is Represent Us. It's www.representus. It talks about the corruption in politics. They have there it is. They have some very interesting videos up there. And they also have a YouTube page, a Facebook page. So you can go to facebook.com. /represent us or /represent.us. I did them both on my phone and it took me to the same place. Also, there is a Facebook page, facebook.com/citizensunited.dc, which also covers a lot of this big money in politics. So I would like you to check both of those out. These are nonpartisan, nonprofit. This is about getting the big money out of politics because the people are not taken care of. And Represent Us, especially, they've got a really great video up at the top that shows you data. It's actually on my Facebook page, too, so you can go to that. If you can't find that, it's the Tracy Marks, facebook.com/the Tracy Marks. So you can find that there. And it just shows basically how what the people want is not really taken into consideration when you start looking at big money as speech. And it's quite enlightening. And like I said, it is nonpartisan. And this is something that we really have to find the time to come together on, because this whole student loan situation with the banks, we don't really stand a chance out there. Not with Goldman Sachs and Citicorp and every other one, JP Morgan, backing these companies.
Well, we're never going to be able to outspend them. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. The only thing that we can do is try to impress into the public consciousness that the only solution here is to ultimately have a constitutional amendment that clearly spells out that corporations or any type of organization that is not a flesh and blood human being is not a human. It's not a person. When we say we the people, like the title of this show, we are the people. We the people means flesh and blood human beings. It does not mean any
JP
type
Morgan
of organization. It doesn't mean a piece of paper. A piece of paper is not a human being. Whether it's a union, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a for-profit, whatever it is, flesh and blood human beings are the only people that have rights under the Constitution. And if you really think of how silly it is, if corporations have First Amendment rights to speech, then arguably they should have all of the other rights in the Bill of Rights. So if they're charged with a crime, do they? If a corporation can't be charged with a crime, but if they were, would they be entitled to have a jury of their peers? So you're going to put Snuggles the bear and the Geico gecko in the jury box? I mean, it's absurd. You don't know whether to laugh or cry when you consider the reasoning.
But they could afford a good lawyer, so therefore justice is not done anyway. I mean, you can't tell me that if people with good lawyers get away with a lot more than, I'm sorry, when you go in and you have a coin-appointed lawyer, what is that? They get less than $200? Well, depending on where you live, but there's a very small budget for each of those people.
Well, as they always say, you're better off being guilty and rich than innocent and poor in this country. No question that that's the case. And it's not just the lawyers, it's also access to other expert witnesses and so forth in the court system.
Because those DNA tests, all that costs money, and if you don't have it, you're not going to get it.
But so that's the first thing that we have to, there really should be, I think, a grassroots social media campaign really to get in the public consciousness that this is the way that our Constitution has been just trampled on. We're saying that organizations are people, and ultimately the second measure is that we need to have public-funded campaigns.
Absolutely. A limit. And everybody should have the same amount to spend.
Everybody should have the same amount because ultimately...
and they should have to prove the trash they took.
Exactly. And ultimately a election is a debate. And if one side gets to talk... imagine if you're watching a debate, any sort of debate, whether it's a high school debate or whether it's a presidential debate. Imagine if one side gets to talk 10 times more or 100 times more than the other side. It's just not a debate at that point.
And that's what it equates to with all this money.
That's exactly what it equates to.
And look at what happened last time. I was so embarrassed as an American then, because the Green Party president and vice president nominees showed up at one of the debates, and they were actually taken away in handcuffs. They did a silent protest. It wasn't like there was screaming and yelling. They were both very meek. How do you do that? These are people that are running for our highest office of government, and you're going to take them away in handcuffs because they are there to silently protest that they should be able to debate? What's wrong with us?
I think you're referring to Jill Stein,
yes,
who ran as a Green Party candidate.
And her and her vice president were both taken away in handcuffs last election.
They were also very prominent during the Occupy Wall Street movement as well. And, it would be great if we could hear more from Jill Stein and people that have her ideas. But unfortunately, they just don't have the donors. And what gets said is ultimately based on who's paying.
Right.
And again, we live in a campaign culture where speech equals money, or money equals speech, either way you look at it, and this is what we get. And so people that come out that want to represent the interests of the American public, that's never heard. The only thing that we hear are those that represent the interests of a sliver of 1% of the population that's ultimately funding the entire thing.
And when you look at this video on Represent Us, it shows you just exactly, they have the graph. Please go watch that video. And I'd like to say also that this is also causing a split in the Democratic Party because the progressives, those that are looking more, they're not for, they want to vote for the better candidate, for the people that are going to back up what they believe is important, as opposed to just let's strictly go Democrat or strictly Republican, what have you. And, they realize that Hillary is backed by all this big money. So this is causing a big split in the Democratic Party right now, I think. And, I'm hoping Bernie Sanders gets in there.
It would be nice to see Bernie advance, if for no other reason, that he truly is out there trying to represent the best interests of the American public and the middle class, and he's not represented by big money donors to the same extent that other candidates are.
It's amazing how much grassroots money he was able to raise just in his first 5 days. It was very impressive.
We were talking relatively small donations.
Right. Which is what happened with Obama. His marketing team were phenomenal. They revolutionized the use of the internet as far as coming around to how to do all that. He made those big changes. He was the first one. He was a pioneer with that. And Bernie Sanders is doing very well with that.
I think it would just be interesting to see, you're mentioning the Democratic Party and how they supposedly represent the progressive movement. It's amazing how there are so many scandals that involving corporate America that ultimately is not being recorded at all.
Well, yeah, and you don't see it on mainstream news. But again, you've got 6 banks that control all of them, and you've got, or is it 5 banks and 6 media, vice versa. So,
it's hard to tell
what
because
country are we?
it's hard to tell because we have subsidiaries. So you have, one parent corporation that owns these other corporations, which ultimately they're like the children or grandchildren.
Right.
Again,
well, it's like Sally Mae with all the collection companies.
If we are to say corporations are people, perhaps subsidiaries should be referred to as the children. Exactly. But if you look at, for example, today we had this early this morning we had a massive free fall in the Dow. It fell 1,000 points. What ultimately happened was in China they were devaluing their currency, the yuan, and they were devaluing their currency in an effort to increase the attractiveness of their exports relative to our imports into China. Now, if you watch the news, it would appear to indicate that we're not importing anything into China, but yet that was the reason that the Dow fell. It's really interesting because it caused a panic amongst U.S. investors about something that supposedly isn't going on at all. We look at the Keystone XL pipeline, which has gotten a lot of attention in the news, but it's amazing how nobody puts the dots together. And you say, why is this pipeline going from the tar sands up north all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico? There's plenty of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. There would be no reason to route that oil to the Gulf of Mexico unless you were planning on loading it onto cargo vessels and shipping it to China, which is where our oil companies are ultimately going to be making huge profits in the near future. And which is
they're shipping everything.
And of course, the other issue is that oil prices have fallen somewhat, and that's another thing that investors have been panicking about.
Well, there's so much manipulation going on out there, and it's just a matter of time before it all falls down. I mean, we're a debt-based economy now. Even these corporations are borrowing. Everybody's getting their gigantic bonuses, but come on, we don't even have that much money in the country.
Well, it's a heads I win, tails you lose. The way that we have this extreme wealth inequality is that we have a system that essentially allows a very small percentage of the population to gamble with everyone else's money. It's kind of like if I were to take your money, take it to the casino, and if I win, I keep the winnings and give the rest back to you. And if I lose, I just go home with nothing and you lose your money.
Well, that's what's happening with the slabs for the pension funds, for the state pension funds. You've got student loan debt wrapped up in that. Okay, so if people don't make their student loan debt funds or, debt funds, these student loan debt payments, there goes your pension fund.
Right.
So
it's taking your pension, and originally these were supposed to be very safe investments.
How could they be?
But they weren't, and we had these toxic mortgage-backed securities. It seems like everyone's forgotten about.
Jail.
Nobody went to jail, even though J.P. Morgan Chase was clearly lying about, and other financial institutions were clearly lying about the integrity of these instruments, and nobody went to jail. They paid very small fines, and then that was it. And, they continue to, and by the way, they control the money supply completely.
Oh, yeah.
The Federal Reserve is completely controlled by the largest banks.
Well, I mean, that was our first mass exodus in, the early 1900s was when J.P. Morgan was first starting to come to power. And we've got a mass exodus going on right now. Other countries offer free college. They're not only free college, but free food, free housing. You're paying fees. You can pretty much go to school for, $3,000-$5,000 a year, if that, depending on where you go. And medical.
Yeah, that's why.
So why would we want to be here? The poor people that can't get out are the ones that are stuck here, and they're the ones that are most abused.
Well, it's the silent majority is eventually growing, and so to the extent that they can be engaged, potentially we can change it. It's only when rights become so ingrained in the hearts and mind of the population do they become difficult to take away. And when we see some of these things happening, like when we see the rights of organizations and corporations taking priority over the rest of us, this is when the public has to reject these thoughts.
Well, right now, as it stands, as you will see on that Represent Us video, the 80-90% of the population can be for something, and it's got like a 30% chance, if that, of actually coming to pass. Whereas if a corporation does, it's got like an 80 or 90% chance of happening.
Well, it's unfortunate that you can often predict the outcome of a campaign, of any type of election based upon campaign spending.
And that's got to go. And the only way to do that is with an amendment. Is that correct?
I think that's the only way. We just can't rely on the courts to do it. The courts are
well, they're bought too.
they're bought, perhaps to a lesser extent, but they are absolutely bought. The federal judges are elected, or not elected; they're appointed for life. State judges are
That's
elected.
crazy, though, in itself. I mean, how do it's, I would think it would be really hard to stay on the straight and narrow after seeing years and years and years of.
Well, they often come in with their own ideas and their own prejudices. I think it's interesting how we've been seeing these commercials about gay marriage lately, where they say,
Yeah, I don't even have a TV.
There's
Can't stand it.
there's this commercial that's trying to rile the public up about gay marriage, saying how can 5 unelected lawyers, referring to the majority, it was a 5-4 decision that said that gay marriage was required under the Constitution. And ultimately, I think it's interesting. You don't see any commercials that say, why are 5 unelected lawyers on the other side allowed to ultimately change the meaning of the word people under the Constitution, which has much greater ramifications
Absolutely.
to the public than gay marriage. Certainly the extent to which gay marriage would matter to heterosexual couples, which it really doesn't at all. Whereas,
I mean, come on, live and let live. You can't force people to think something just because you think it's so. You know what I mean? So we've only got a little bit left, about a minute and a half. Is there anything you'd like to close with? And make sure and tell them about your show.
Oh, yes. And by the way, my show's on Tuesday nights right here on WNN, 6 to 6:30 p.m. My guest tomorrow will be Bradford Cohen, a former contestant on The Apprentice, and we'll be talking more about Donald Trump.
I want to come in.
And we'll be discussing his recent the whole birthplace citizenship issue that now he's calling into question, saying that people that are born here to illegal aliens might not be citizens. So that's going to be a whole can of worms that we're going to talk about tomorrow.
That'll be interesting. Well, thank you for joining us again.
Oh, thank you so much.
And we'll be back next week at 7 o'clock. View us on the website or here on the radio at WNN 1470. We're also on iHeart. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
A hustle here and a
You have
hustle
been listening
there.
to We Are the People with social advocate Tracy Marks, who every week bring to the light the needs and changes in our current system. Tune in every Monday night at 7 p.m. on wearethepeople.tv and participate in the conversation in the chat room or call 888-565-1470. Tune in next Monday for more information and facts, and stay aware of your surroundings and challenges at all times.